Kiera Vaughn didn't believe in fairy tales, especially not when her heels were pinching. Her borrowed gown was too tight, and she was holding a tray of champagne flutes instead of sipping one. This wasn't her world. The gala glittered with crystal chandeliers, flowing gowns, and tuxedos that probably cost more than her monthly rent. She kept her head down, weaving between guests, avoiding eye contact, and praying she wouldn't spill anything on the art collectors and hedge fund giants in the room. "Excuse me," a deep voice said, low and smooth, right beside her. "You missed me." She turned and froze. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore a black tux that fit him like it had been stitched directly onto his body. His jawline looked like it had been carved from stone, and his eyes, icy blue, sharp, unreadable, were locked on her. He didn't look like the kind of man who got ignored or refused. "I'm sorry," Kiera said quickly, offering the tray. "Champagne." He didn't take one. Instead, he gave her a look like he was trying to figure her out. "You don't belong here," she bristled. "Wow, thanks." "I didn't mean it like that." His mouth twitched into something that might have been a smile. "You're not like the rest of them. You look like you're trying to disappear." "That's because I am," she muttered, trying to move past him. He stepped in front of her, blocking her path without touching her. "What's your name?" She hesitated. "Why, because I'm bored," he said, unapologetically. "And you just became the most interesting thing in this room," she blinked. "Kiera," he offered his hand. "Nolan Foster." Her stomach flipped. She'd heard the name before on news sites, whispered among servers at other luxury events. Foster Holdings. Real estate, tech, private aviation. Billionaire, ruthless, untouchable. And now he was holding out his hand like he wasn't worth over $10 billion. She shook it, stunned by the strength in his grip and the way his eyes didn't leave hers. She pulled away quickly. "I should get back to work." "Or," he said, "you could take a break." She narrowed her eyes. "Right, because the billionaire wants to rescue the poor girl in the apron. I've seen that movie." He leaned in slightly. "Maybe I'm not trying to rescue you. Maybe I just want to talk to someone who doesn't care who I am." "Well, mission accomplished," she said, lifting her tray. "I don't." But as she walked away, she could feel his eyes on her back, and somehow that was worse than if he'd said something arrogant. Later that night, Kiera was out on the terrace, cooling off and trying to ignore the ache in her feet. She was off the clock. The glittering ballroom behind her buzzed with laughter and music. She leaned on the balcony railing, breathing in the cold night air. "You disappeared again." She turned. Nolan stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets. He wasn't smiling, but he didn't look angry either. "Why are you out here?" she asked. He shrugged. "Same reason as you. The walls in there feel like they're closing in." "You own half the buildings in this city," she said. "Shouldn't you be used to walls?" That made him laugh. It was low and quiet, but real. "Touché." He walked over and stood beside her, looking out over the skyline. "You know, when I walked into that room tonight, I thought I'd leave early, shake a few hands, donate a check. But then you walked by," she raised an eyebrow, "and you decided to mess with me." "No," he said, turning toward her. "I decided to stay." His eyes were too intense. She looked away. "What are you doing?" "Trying to figure out why you're working a gala when you look like you should be attending one." She let out a short laugh. "Because rent exists and student loans. And because life doesn't care if you have a degree in art history when you can't afford to eat." He was quiet for a second. "Where'd you go to school?" "NYU, smart, expensive," he nodded. "Let me take you to dinner," she blinked. "What, dinner with me tomorrow?" She stared at him. "Are you serious?" "Very," she shook her head. "I'm not some project." "I didn't say you were. You don't know me." "Not yet," she laughed, stepping away. "You're insane." "Only a little," he said, smiling this time, "but I'm not wrong. There's something here." She stopped. "What do you mean?" "This," he said, motioning between them. "You feel it too, don't lie." She hated that he was right. Her heart was beating too fast, and she couldn't remember the last time someone looked at her like that, like they saw her, not what she lacked. Still, she crossed her arms. "Fine, one dinner, but I pick the place, deal. And it can't cost more than $20, he grinned. "I'll try my best." She turned to go, then looked back. Why me? He didn't hesitate. Because you weren't looking for me. And that makes you the only person here who's real. Something in her chest cracked open just a little. The next day, he met her outside a hole-in-the-wall ramen shop in the East Village. No tux, no entourage. Just jeans, a black coat, and that same intense look in his eyes when she walked up. "You actually came," she said. "I said I would. You're late." "I had to convince my driver to let me out without my security detail." She laughed, unlocking the door. "Good. Because if you brought a bodyguard into this place, they'd throw you out." They sat in the back, steam rising from their bowls, and he asked about her life, her art, her dreams, her student debt, her favorite painters. She asked about his, and he told her about his mother who raised him alone, his first business at 18, the way he hated being called a mogul. By the end of the night, she realized she hadn't looked at the clock once. Outside, he walked her to the subway. "I had a good time," he said, hands in his pockets. She nodded. "Me too." He leaned down just a little. "Can I see you again?" She hesitated. "I don't do fairy tales, Nolan," he smiled. "That's fine, I'm not offering one, just dinner, maybe something more." She met his eyes. "I'll think about it." But when the train pulled away, she was already thinking about more. Kiera was halfway through scrubbing acrylic paint from her hands when the knock came. She wasn't expecting anyone. Her studio apartment was a glorified closet above a laundromat in Queens, and the only people who ever showed up without warning were her landlord or the neighbor's cat. She wiped her palms on a towel, stepped over canvases, and cracked the door open. Nolan stood on the other side, holding a white pastry box with one hand and a bouquet of wildflowers in the other. Not roses, not lilies. Wildflowers slightly mismatched, vibrant and real. "You didn't answer your phone," he said, then held up the box. "Bribery," she stared. "How did you get my address?" "You left your portfolio folder in my car after dinner. There was a receipt inside. I figured I'd return it." She reached for the folder tucked under his arm. "You went through it?" "Just enough to find you," he said. "And maybe a few sketches." "Unbelievable." "They were good," he added. "One looked like it was drawn while you were riding the subway. You caught a man's expression like he knew a secret no one else did." She stepped aside, letting him in. "Most people would have just texted." "You didn't give me your number." She narrowed her eyes. "Right." The space was cramped, with canvases leaned against every wall and a chipped desk cluttered with brushes and open tubes of paint. He didn't look out of place. He looked entirely too comfortable, setting the flowers in an empty coffee mug and placing the box on the table like he'd been there before. "What's in the box?" "Lemon tarts from a bakery I invested in last year," he said. "They're better than they sound." She lifted the lid, inhaled the citrusy sugar, and took the smallest bite. It was unfair how good it was. "I came to ask you something," he said after a moment. "There's an event tomorrow, not a gala, something quieter." "A private viewing." "Of what?" "A contemporary collection. Small group, mostly artists and collectors. I want you to come." "Why?" "Because I think you should be seen." She frowned. "I'm not one of your projects. I know that. You barely know me. I'm trying to change that." She folded her arms. "What's your angle?" "No angle," he said. "Just a hunch. I think you'd fit in better than you think." She studied him. "You're not going to tell them I work events, are you?" "No, I'm going to tell them you're an artist." He left soon after, but not before asking her to wear something she felt powerful in. Not expensive, not borrowed, just hers. The next evening, she stood in front of a mirror, adjusting a navy jumpsuit she'd thrifted months ago. Structured shoulders, clean lines, and a neckline that made her feel like she actually belonged somewhere. Her hair was twisted up, her eyeliner sharp. It was the first time in a while she didn't feel like she was pretending. Nolan's car pulled up at exactly 7. Not a stretch limo or something ridiculous, just a sleek black sedan. He stepped out, wearing a charcoal suit with no tie, and opened the door himself. "You look like you're about to sign $1 million deal," she said as she slid in. "Only if I'm lucky." The viewing was held in a converted brownstone on the Upper West Side. Inside, the space was warm, filled with natural light and quiet conversations. Abstract canvases lined the walls, and instead of champagne flutes, people sipped wine from stemless glasses. Nolan introduced her to a woman with silver hair and horn-rimmed glasses. "This is Evelyn Marston," he said. She curated the exhibit. Evelyn extended her hand. "And you are Kiera Vaughn," she said, pulse racing. "Are you showing anywhere?" "She will be," Nolan answered before she could speak. Evelyn's eyes lingered on Kiera's face. "Good, we need more women with perspective." They moved on and he leaned closer. "You handled that perfectly." I nearly passed out. No one noticed. They stood in front of a piece titled Dissonance, a chaotic blend of reds and muted blues with thick texture that looked like it had been scraped and rebuilt 100 times. "I like this one," she said. "It's messy and loud and doesn't care if you like it." "I thought the same," she looked at him. "You relate to that, more than I should." He didn't elaborate and she didn't push, but something shifted between them, then something less flirtation, more recognition. Later on the way out, a woman with a clipboard stopped Nolan. She was tall, severe, and clearly knew him. "You disappeared for a week. Is this why?" Her eyes flicked to Kiera. "New muse?" Kiera stiffened. "She's not a muse," Nolan said calmly. "She's an artist." The woman gave a thin smile. "Of course." In the car, silence stretched between them. "You didn't have to say that," Kiera said finally. "I wasn't going to let her diminish you. I'm not used to being defended. You should be." She turned to the window, watching the city blur past. "Do you ever get tired of it?" she asked. "Of what?" "Being watched, judged, expected." He paused. "Only when it feels like none of it's about me anymore." When they reached her building, he got out and walked her to the door. No pressure, no lingering glances, just quiet. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For making space." He looked at her, and something vulnerable flickered across his features. "Anytime." She didn't invite him up, but as the door closed behind her, she leaned against it, heart pounding, and realized something terrifying. She was starting to want him to stay. Kiera didn't expect to hear from Nolan for a few days. People like him drifted in and out of things, deals, cities, people. But 3 mornings after the gallery showing, she found herself standing across from him in a sunlit South Bronx warehouse. Paint still under her nails and sweat clinging to her back from hauling canvases. "I thought you said you were bad at surprises," she said, eyeing the black SUV parked behind him. "I said I hate being surprised. Doing it is fine," he replied, nodding toward the open loading dock. "You mentioned once that this place was closing next month." I looked into the lease, her eyes narrowed. "Why would you do that?" "Because this building's been used by artists for over 20 years, he said, stepping inside. "And unless you want to paint in a closet forever, I figured you might want options. I didn't ask you to fix anything." "I know." "That's why I didn't buy it. I just made a few calls. The landlord's willing to extend the rental for 6 months at a reduced rate if someone agrees to curate a community series out of it." She folded her arms. "You want me to organize something here? I want you to run it," he said. "Your name on the press release, your choices on the wall. You decide who gets space, who gets shown. The only condition is that you keep it rooted in the neighborhood." She stared at him, her throat dry. "That's a lot. You once said life doesn't care about your degree," he said. "Maybe it's time someone did." She leaned against a support beam, trying to steady her breathing. "Why are you really doing this?" He studied her for a long moment. "Because I see what happens when people like you disappear. And I'd rather help you stay visible." "I didn't ask to be seen." "No," he said, "but you're not hiding anymore either." She didn't answer. The light shifted through the windows, casting long shadows across the concrete floors. Eventually, she said, "If I do this, it's on my terms, of course. And no press, no headlines about the Billionaire's charity case, agreed. And you don't get to pull strings behind my back. Deal?" She looked at him. "You trust me with all this." "I trust what you'll make," he said simply. Later that week, she stood in front of a group of local artists in the same warehouse, explaining the new program. Nolan stayed in the back, silent, arms crossed, watching her lead without needing his voice behind her. Afterward, when the crowd filtered out and the room finally emptied, she approached him, wiping her hands on her jeans. "That went better than I expected," she said. "I never had any doubt." She tilted her head. "You didn't say a word." "I told you," he said. "This is your space." She hesitated, then added, "You were right. About being seen, it's terrifying." But she exhaled. "But it's also the first time I felt like I was actually standing in the right place." He stepped closer. "Then let's keep you there." The next week passed in a blur. Meetings with muralists, sketch approvals. Late nights spent taping off floor plans and budgeting with a calculator she hadn't used since college. Kiera barely had time to breathe, let alone think about Nolan, until he showed up again. This time on a Wednesday afternoon, standing in the middle of the warehouse with 2 garment bags slung over his shoulder and a look she hadn't seen before careful. Almost uncertain. "You free this Friday?" She looked up from her laptop, confused. "I have a walkthrough with the lighting guy at 4. Cancel it." "Why?" "Because there's something I want to show you, and it has to happen that night." She raised an eyebrow. "Do I get a hint?" "You'll need this." He handed her the garment bag. Inside was a sleek black jumpsuit unlike anything she'd ever worn, tailored minimalist, with clean lines and stitching so fine it felt like air in her hands. She stared at it. "This looks like it belongs on a runway. It's custom." Her jaw tightened. "Nolan, I know, but it's not a gift. It's part of the night. I don't do favors disguised as fashion." He met her eyes. "This one's different." Friday arrived with rain, steady and soft, misting her windows and turning the sidewalk silver. When she stepped outside, Nolan was waiting in the same car from before, dressed in a deep navy suit that made him look sharper than any photo she'd ever seen of him online. "You clean up nice," she said, sliding in beside him. He looked at her, eyes dragging over the jumpsuit she'd reluctantly agreed to wear. "You look like you own the sky." She didn't know what to say to that, so she didn't. They drove in silence for 10 minutes before she realized they weren't headed toward Manhattan. Instead, the car pulled into a small private airfield just outside Brooklyn. A sleek jet sat waiting on the tarmac. Kiera blinked. "You're joking." He opened the door. "Come on." "I said no fairy tales," she warned, but her legs moved anyway. "This isn't a fairy tale," he said as they ascended the stairs. "It's a detour." Inside was quiet and impossibly luxurious white leather, dark wood, champagne already chilling. She didn't sit, just turned to him as the engines began to hum. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere that deserves you." She stared at him, then finally dropped into one of the seats. "If this turns into some kind of rich guy spectacle, it won't." The flight was short, less than an hour. When they landed, she saw cliffs, water. A coastal estate carved into a rocky shoreline and lit up like something out of a dream. "What is this place?" she asked as they climbed into a waiting car. "A house I bought years ago and never stayed in," he said. "I thought I'd sell it. Then I thought I'd show it to someone who might understand it." They pulled through iron gates and up a winding drive. The house wasn't enormous, but it was stunning stone walls, floor-to-ceiling glass, and the sound of waves crashing just beyond the terrace. Inside, a table was set for 2 beneath a skylight. No servers, no staff, just them. "I had the chef leave everything ready," he said. "We serve ourselves." She watched him uncork the wine, pour her a glass, and hand her a plate. It was the first time she'd seen him do something so ordinary. "I don't get you," she said as she sat down. "Good," he replied. "I don't want to be predictable. You should be arrogant. You should expect the world to orbit around you." "I used to," he admitted. "Then I realized the view's better when you're not the center of it." She studied him. "That doesn't sound like the guy I met in the ballroom." "That guy was tired," he said, "and looking for something he didn't know how to name. And now, he said, I know I want to see where this goes." She looked down at her plate, then back at him. "You think we're a good idea?" "I think you're the first risk I've wanted to take for the right reasons." She didn't know how to answer that. Not yet. But when he reached across the table and took her hand, she let him. Not because she was swept up or dazzled. Not because she believed in impossible things. But because, For the first time in a long time, someone wasn't trying to pull her out of her world. They were inviting her into theirs with both feet grounded and the door wide open. The wind off the cliffs was cold, but Kiera didn't notice it as she stood barefoot on the stone terrace the next morning, a mug warming her hands and the Atlantic stretching endlessly in front of her. Inside, she could hear Nolan moving in the kitchen, humming something under his breath off key but confident, like he didn't care how he sounded. It was the kind of detail she never would have imagined about him. He appeared in the doorway with 2 plates balanced in one hand. "The toaster's smarter than I am. It nearly set itself on fire." She turned, eyebrows raised. "You burned toast." "Only slightly. I compensated with strawberries." She took the plate from him and sat on the wide wooden bench built into the terrace wall. He joined her, legs stretched out, tie gone, sleeves rolled up like he didn't have a boardroom waiting for him anywhere. "I have to be back by afternoon," she said. "I know. I have 3 meetings," he nodded. "And I'll be in D.C. by tonight." Kiera picked at the edge of the toast. "So what happens when the gallery opens? You tell me." She looked at him. "You're not going to take it over?" "No, but I'll be there, quiet in the back unless you want me somewhere else." "You're not just saying that to make me feel in control. I've made enough decisions for other people." "I don't need to make yours." That silenced her. After breakfast, he walked her down a narrow path that led to a rocky overlook. The water below was wild, crashing against the shore, and the wind tugged her hair loose from where she'd pinned it back. He didn't speak until they reached the edge. "I've been thinking about that night we met," Nolan said, hands tucked into his coat pockets. "I was 2 days away from signing off on a merger that would have doubled the size of my company. Everyone expected me to shake hands, smile, and leave with a press quote." She glanced at him. "And instead, I left early, canceled the deal the next day." Her head snapped toward him. "You canceled it." His jaw tightened. "It was wrong. It would have gutted a smaller firm just to boost our numbers. I'd done it before, but that night. I saw how easy it was to stop being a person." Kiera didn't know what to say. She hadn't expected this vulnerability from a man who could buy countries if he wanted. She reached for his hand without thinking. He let her take it. "I don't want to be someone you admire for what I've done," he said. "I'd rather be someone you trust for what I haven't." She squeezed his fingers. "You're not who I expected. That's mutual." The flight back was quiet and comfortable. No pressure, no declarations. Just her head resting lightly against his shoulder as the coastline faded into cityscape. Back in the city, things moved quickly. The gallery space opened under the name Found. Kiera's idea. A place for artists who'd fallen through the cracks, been overlooked, or hadn't yet been given the chance to be seen. The first show sold out. The second had a wait list before it even opened. Nolan stayed in the background. He never took credit, never stepped in. But he was always there when she turned around, quietly supportive, always watching like he was seeing something unfold he never wanted to interrupt. Then, almost 2 months later, she walked into the warehouse one morning to find a small envelope taped to the inside of the door. Her name was written in Nolan's distinct handwriting. Inside was a single card with one line, "Come to the roof." She climbed the iron stairs, heart pounding. It was early, the sky still streaked with pale gray, and she expected to find him alone. She did, but not empty-handed. On the rooftop, Nolan stood beside a long wooden easel covered in a white cloth. A soft wind tugged at the corners. When she stepped forward, he turned, his expression unreadable. "You once told me you didn't want a fairy tale," he said. "I still don't." "Good," he said, "because this isn't one." He pulled the cloth from the easel. It was a framed rendering, architectural, clean, professional, but behind the lines was something more, a blueprint for a permanent gallery. Her gallery, a larger space fully funded with classrooms, workspaces, and an exhibition hall. On the corner of a building she recognized from the neighborhood she'd grown up in, her throat tightened. "That's my old street." "I bought the old shoe factory next to your school," he said. "It's been empty for years. You once said you wanted more space for artists to work without being priced out. Now you'll have it." She blinked. "Why would you do this?" "Because I love you," he said without hesitation, And because you changed the way I see everything, her breath caught. He stepped toward her. You walked into that ballroom like the whole world was trying to erase you, he said, and I saw someone who deserved to be carved into it instead. She stared at him. You love me? I didn't plan to, he said, but I fell anyway. Kiera shook her head, blinking fast. You know I'm still figuring myself out. I know, he said, and I'm not asking you to stop, I'm just asking if I can be there while you do. She laughed then, wet and sharp, stepping forward until their foreheads touched. Yes, she whispered. But only if you promise not to build another gallery behind my back. I promise. And no private jets unless I get to pick the playlist. Deal. And you're not allowed to ever make me feel small. You never were. He kissed her then, on a rooftop above a city that had tried to forget her, in the arms of a man who never once looked away. And for the first time in her life, Kiera didn't feel like she'd been chosen out of pity or rescued out of obligation. She felt seen, not because of what she lacked, but because of what she was. And in his arms, in that moment, it was enough to know that maybe, just maybe, she hadn't been looking for love at all. But love had been looking for her. Kiera stood inside the gutted interior of what used to be the old factory on the corner of her childhood street. Dust caught the afternoon sunlight in golden streaks, and the sound of distant construction echoed from deeper inside the building. The air smelled like sawdust and possibility. She moved toward the far wall, where a large sketch of the final layout had been pinned. Her name was listed at the bottom alongside the title, Creative Director. You haven't stopped moving since we walked in, Nolan's voice came from behind her, calm but alert. She turned, surprised to find him holding a hard hat. You brought that for me, you're the boss now. I figured you should at least look the part. She took it from him and slid it on, the oversized helmet wobbling slightly on her head. I look ridiculous. You look like a woman who's building something only she could imagine. He didn't stare at her the way people usually did when they were trying to flatter her. He said it with a kind of reverence, like it was a fact he'd already accepted. You're really not going to try to take over any of this, she asked. You're waiting for me to mess it up. I'm waiting for you to start giving instructions. I already gave my last one, he said. I told the contractors to listen to you, she blinked. That's actually terrifying. Welcome to leadership, she crossed her arms. How do you do it? Delegate, I mean, let go of control. It took me a long time, he said. I used to believe if I wasn't steering everything it would crash. But turns out when you trust the right people, they take you somewhere better than you ever planned. Their eyes locked. He wasn't talking about just the gallery anymore. They walked the perimeter together, stepping around cables and fresh lumber. When they reached the back of the space, she opened a door that led into a small, windowed room, her future office. I want this to be more than a gallery, she said, her voice lower now. I want it to have night classes, mentorships, open studio hours. I want teenagers to walk in and know they don't have to wait for permission to create. He leaned against the door frame. Then you'll do exactly that. Kiera turned to face him fully. I'm not afraid of failing. I'm afraid of being seen while I figure things out. You've already been seen, he said, and still here you are, building something anyway. She stepped closer, her fingers brushing the front of his shirt. You're not who I thought I'd fall for. I hope not, he said. I've worked hard not to be that man anymore. Good, she murmured. Because I like this version. His hand slid to her waist, grounding her. Then I'll keep becoming him. Weeks passed. The gallery's progress was steady. Local artists had already begun submitting work, and the first workshop dates were set. Kiera's days filled with meetings, blueprints, and decisions that built a future she hadn't dared to picture before. And Nolan never once made her feel like she owed any part of it to him. Their nights were quieter. Sometimes they'd sit on the fire escape at her apartment, sharing takeout out of cartons, her legs in his lap. Other times, it was his place, the penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows and a kitchen he still didn't know how to use. But wherever they were, the rhythm between them held steady. No games, no second-guessing, just mutual gravity pulling them closer. One evening, after a long day of finalizing the gallery's signage, Nolan walked into his living room carrying a small black box. "I had this made weeks ago," he said before she could ask. "But I wanted to wait until you felt completely grounded." She hesitated, then reached for it. Inside was a delicate gold pendant shaped like a paintbrush, its bristles embedded with a tiny sapphire. "It's beautiful," she breathed. He stepped behind her, fastening it around her neck. "You once told me you didn't want to be saved, so I won't, but I will stand beside you while you save yourself, every time," her pulse hammered beneath the chain. "Nolan." He turned her gently to face him. "I don't need a ceremony or a contract, not yet. I just need you to know that I choose you, in every version of this life." She leaned into him, her forehead against his. "Then we keep building, together." The gallery opened to the public on an early spring morning. The line stretched down the block before the doors even unlocked. Inside, the exhibits buzzed with life murals, installations, photography, all curated by Kiera and her small team of local voices. She wore a simple black dress with her pendant shining at her collarbone. As she moved through the space, people stopped her not to ask who she was working for, but what she had created. Nolan stayed mostly in the back, exactly where she wanted him. He didn't need the spotlight. He only needed to see her in hers. When the crowd thinned, he joined her on the rooftop deck she'd converted into a quiet sketching nook. She was barefoot, a glass of wine in one hand, her heels dangling from the other. "You did it," he said. "No," she corrected. "We did." He reached for her free hand. "You know, I've acquired companies, launched ventures, built skyscrapers, but this watching what you've made, I've never felt anything like it." She smiled, tilting her head. "You're getting sentimental. Only for you." They stood together, the city humming below, no flashbulbs, no audience. Just the woman who'd changed his view of power, and the man who'd taught her that love didn't have to look like surrender. As the sun dipped behind the skyline, casting their shadows long across the rooftop, she leaned her head on his shoulder. "I don't think I ever believed in forever," she said quietly. "Then let's make it up as we go," he replied. And in that moment, surrounded by the art they'd brought into the world and the life they'd chosen to build with open eyes and open hands, Kiera finally understood this wasn't a rescue. It wasn't a fantasy, it was real, and it was hers.